Chicago winters didn't simply arrive, they attacked. The wind rolled off Lake Michigan like a blade dragged across bone, turning sidewalks into empty battlefields where only the desperate still walked. Catherine Hale was one of those desperate people. She pushed through the diner's back door just before midnight, tying her thin scarf tighter around her neck. The warm air from inside vanished instantly behind her, replaced by a violent gust of snow that stung her cheeks. Her shift had lasted 12 hours. Her paycheck would barely last 12 days. Catherine checked her phone as she stepped under the flickering alley light. Her bank app opened slowly, the cracked screen glowing weakly through the falling snow. Balance? $18.72. She exhaled through her teeth. Luxury living, she muttered. The Rusty Lantern Diner sat on the edge of downtown, a place where taxi drivers, night nurses, and insomniac construction workers drank bad coffee and tipped in loose change. Catherine had worked there for 2 years. Before that, she had believed life worked according to effort. But life had corrected that illusion. Her mother had gotten sick. The hospital bills came. School ended. Reality began. Now Catherine carried plates instead of textbooks. Still, she had kept one good thing. Her coat. A warm, camel-colored wool coat she'd found in a thrift store 2 winters earlier. It was too elegant for her life, too expensive for her world. But it was warm. And tonight, warmth was survival. The snow thickened as she stepped onto State Street. Neon lights smeared across wet pavement, reflecting red and blue like bleeding colors in the storm. The city was empty. Everyone smart had already gone home. Catherine pulled the coat tighter. The last train left in 15 minutes. If she missed it, she would walk 3 miles to her studio apartment with the broken radiator. She hurried past dark storefronts and abandoned bus stops. Then she noticed something strange. A flash of red. At first, she thought it was a lost scarf caught on a bench. But as she got closer, the shape moved. Catherine slowed. Under a weak street lamp sat a small child. A little girl. Maybe 6 years old. She wore a bright red velvet dress, white tights, and shiny black shoes. No hat, no gloves, no coat. The girl was shaking violently, not crying, just sitting there trembling so hard the bench rattled. Catherine's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked around quickly. No parents. No nanny. No car waiting nearby. Only the snow. "Hey," Catherine called softly. The girl slowly lifted her head. Her lips were blue, her skin pale. "Mommy said, 'Wait here,'" the child whispered through chattering teeth. Catherine dropped her bag and knelt in the snow. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" "Sophia." "Okay, Sophia," Catherine said gently. "Where is your driver?" "He went to get gas." "How long ago?" Sophia shrugged weakly. "A long time." Catherine's stomach twisted. No responsible adult left a child alone in a blizzard. This wasn't carelessness. This was negligence. Or something worse. She grabbed the girl's hands. They were ice. Hypothermia was already setting in. Catherine didn't hesitate. She stood and immediately unbuttoned her coat. The wind slammed into her like a wall. Her thin waitress uniform offered almost no protection. Still, she wrapped the coat around the girl's small shoulders. It swallowed Sophia completely. The collar covered her ears. The sleeves hung past her hands. But warmth returned instantly. Sophia inhaled deeply. "It smells nice," she murmured. Catherine smiled despite the cold. "Listen to me," she said gently. "I'm going to get help, okay?" She pulled out her phone. The screen flickered. Battery, 1%. "No, no, no!" She tapped emergency call. The phone died. The screen went black. Catherine cursed quietly. Then she looked toward the subway entrance 2 blocks away. "I'm going to run to the station and find a police officer," she said. Sophia looked up at her. "But you'll be cold." "I'll survive," Catherine said. She squeezed the girl's hands. "You stay here. Don't move." Catherine turned and ran. The wind cut through her uniform instantly. Every breath burned her lungs. Her arms went numb within seconds, but she kept running because a child was freezing, and sometimes morality didn't allow hesitation. What Catherine didn't see was the black SUV parked in the shadows across the park. Inside sat a man who ruled half the city's criminal underworld, Thomas Rossi, Mafia boss, strategist, executioner, a man feared by politicians and criminals alike. He was watching the park through tinted glass. The GPS chip in his daughter's bracelet showed she was here, alone. When he saw the red dress on the bench, something inside his chest twisted. "Stop the car," Thomas said quietly. The SUV screeched onto the snow-covered path. Thomas jumped out before it stopped moving. "Sophia!" The little girl looked up. "Papa!" He reached her in seconds, dropping to his knees. His hands shook as he checked her face, her arms, her breathing. Then he noticed the coat. Not hers. A cheap wool coat wrapped tightly around her small body. "Who gave you this?" Thomas asked. "The lady," Sophia said. "What lady?" "The pretty lady who ran away." Thomas stood slowly. He scanned the park. In the distance, he saw a woman sprinting through the snow wearing only a thin diner uniform. No coat, no gloves, no protection. She had given his daughter the only warmth she owned and walked into the storm without it. Thomas Rossi watched her disappear into the subway entrance. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he picked up the coat sleeve and studied it. Cheap fabric, worn elbows, but still warm, still carrying faint traces of perfume and diner grease. A coat that had saved his daughter's life. "Boss?" Bruno asked quietly. Thomas handed him the tracker bracelet. "Get Sophia home." "Yes, boss." And Bruno, "Yes." Thomas's voice became cold steel. "Find the woman." Bruno nodded. "You want to reward her?" Thomas looked toward the subway station where Catherine had vanished. His eyes darkened thoughtfully. "No." He paused. "I want to understand her." The storm continued to rage across Chicago, but somewhere inside that storm, something had shifted. Power had just encountered kindness, and kindness had no idea who was about to find it. 3 days later, Catherine Hale was sick. Not the dramatic kind of sick people showed in movies. No, this was the quiet, miserable kind. The kind where your body shivered under blankets while your head burned with fever. The kind where every breath scraped your lungs. Running through a Chicago blizzard without a coat had consequences. And Catherine was paying for them. She sat curled on the sagging couch inside her tiny studio apartment, wrapped in a thin blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and cheap fabric softener. Outside, snow pressed against the window like frozen fog. Inside, the radiator clanked uselessly. Her phone buzzed. She checked it. A voicemail from Gary, the diner manager. She didn't even need to listen. Still, she pressed play. Gary's nasal voice filled the room. "Catherine, you missed 3 shifts. I can't run a business like this. Don't bother coming back." The voicemail ended. Just like that. 2 years of work erased in 10 seconds. Catherine stared at the wall. "Great," she whispered hoarsely. As if the universe wanted to emphasize the point, someone knocked on her door. Not a polite knock. A heavy one. Authoritative. Catherine frowned. Her landlord usually just slipped angry notes under the door. Another knock. Louder. She groaned and stood, dizziness washing over her. Her apartment was small enough that 3 steps brought her to the door. She didn't bother checking the peephole. She opened it and froze. A man stood in the hallway. He was tall, at least 6'4". Broad shoulders filled the doorway like a wall. His black coat looked tailored, expensive, and utterly out of place in the crumbling apartment building. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes like polished obsidian. The man radiated something dangerous. Quiet danger. The kind that didn't need to prove itself. Catherine instinctively stepped back. "Can I help you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his hand, and in that hand was her coat, cleaned, pressed. Perfect. Catherine blinked. My coat. The man nodded once. I believe this belongs to you. His voice was deep and calm, carrying a weight that filled the small hallway. Recognition clicked in Catherine's mind. You're the father? Yes. He stepped forward slightly. I am Thomas Rossi. He said the name like it should mean something, like lightning should strike. But Catherine only tilted her head. Oh, she said. Is Sophia okay? For the first time, Thomas Rossi looked surprised. Not frightened, not impressed, not greedy. She had asked about his daughter, not his money, not his name. He stepped inside without asking. Catherine frowned. Hey, you can't just walk in here. His eyes scanned the apartment quickly. Peeling paint, a broken table, an empty fridge door hanging slightly open. Then he noticed the paper taped beside the door. Eviction notice. His gaze returned to Catherine. You gave my daughter your coat, he said. Yes. You walked home in a blizzard. Yes? Why? Catherine shrugged weakly. She was freezing. That is not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Silence filled the room. Thomas reached inside his coat and pulled out a checkbook. Catherine stared at it. He began writing. How much? She blinked. For what? For the coat. He tore the check loose. And the gesture. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. You think I helped your daughter for money? Thomas raised one eyebrow slightly. Everyone has a price. Catherine's fever suddenly didn't matter anymore. Anger burned hotter. Get out. Thomas paused. Excuse me? You heard me, Catherine said. Her voice gained strength. I didn't help a freezing child so her rich father could hand me hush money. She pointed toward the door. Take your check and leave. The room went still. Completely still. In Thomas Rossi's world, people begged him. They pleaded. They bargained. No one ordered him to leave. Ever. A slow smile appeared on his face. Not warm, not friendly, predatory. You're unusual, he said softly. I get that a lot. Thomas slipped the check back into his pocket. Good, he said, because I wasn't going to give you money anyway. Catherine frowned. What? You saved my daughter, he continued. That creates a debt. I don't want a debt. Too late. He placed the coat on the back of her couch. Then he walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped. One more thing. Catherine crossed her arms. What? You're being evicted tomorrow. Her stomach tightened. How do you know that? Thomas nodded toward the notice. I read. He opened the door. You should pack. I'm not going anywhere with you. Thomas looked over his shoulder. His eyes were calm. Certain. Yes, he said. You are. Thomas studied her for a long moment. Then he left. The door closed. Silence returned. Catherine stared at it. What a lunatic! Her coat lay neatly folded. She picked it up. Something crinkled inside the pocket. Catherine frowned and reached in. The eviction notice, the same one that had been taped to her door. Except now, a large red stamp covered the page. Paid. Below it was a handwritten note, in elegant script. Be ready at 8 a.m. Don't make me wait. Catherine stared at the message. Her heart pounded slowly. Outside, the snow continued falling, and somewhere in the city, the most powerful man in Chicago had just decided something very dangerous. He had decided Catherine Hale now belonged in his world, whether she wanted to or not. The next morning, Chicago looked like a city buried under glass. Snow covered everything. Cars, sidewalks, street signs, even the broken benches in the small park across Catherine's apartment building had disappeared beneath white drifts. At 7:52 a.m., Catherine Hale sat on her single suitcase on the curb. She had slept maybe 2 hours. Most of the night had been spent staring at the eviction notice with the red paid stamp. She still wasn't sure if she should feel grateful. or terrified. Her camel-colored coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her breath formed clouds in the freezing air. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself. "I'm not actually going." But she hadn't gone back inside either, because curiosity was a powerful thing, and Thomas Rossi had a presence that was impossible to ignore. At exactly 8 a.m., 3 black SUVs turned onto the street. They moved slowly, silently, like predators entering a quiet forest. Catherine watched them stop in front of the building. The middle SUV door opened. A massive man stepped out. 6'5", broad shoulders, shaved head. A fixed scar ran across his cheek. Catherine recognized him immediately. He had been with Thomas the night in the park. The giant walked toward her calmly. "Miss Hale," he said. His voice sounded like gravel. "The boss doesn't like waiting." Catherine crossed her arms. "I'm not going anywhere until I talk to him." The giant nodded once. "Fair." He opened the SUV door. "Then talk to him." Catherine hesitated. Then she stood and climbed into the vehicle. The door shut behind her. Inside smelled like leather and expensive coffee. Thomas Rossi sat across from her, perfectly composed, dark charcoal suit, silver watch, tablet in his hands. He didn't look up immediately. 3 minutes late, he said calmly. Catherine frowned. "I was sitting here for 10 minutes. He finally looked up. "Punctuality is about perception." She rolled her eyes. "You're insufferable." He almost smiled. "Possibly." The SUV began moving. Catherine leaned forward. "Stop the car." Thomas ignored her. "I can't just leave my life," she continued. "My job is gone," he said. "My apartment was taken care of. My friends. You don't have any in Chicago." Catherine blinked. "What?" Thomas tapped his tablet. "You moved here 5 years ago. You dropped out of nursing school 2 years later. You worked 2 jobs to pay for your mother's medical care. She passed away 8 months ago." Catherine's stomach twisted. "You investigated me? I verify people who enter my daughter's life. That's invasive. That's survival." The SUV turned onto the highway. The city skyline began shrinking behind them. Catherine stared out the window. "You still haven't told me why I'm here." Thomas closed his tablet. "My daughter needs someone." "A nanny?" "No. A caretaker. She already has one. She has employees." Thomas leaned forward slightly. "She doesn't have someone who actually cares about her." Catherine studied his face. "And you think that's me?" "I know it is." "How?" "You gave her your only coat." Silence filled the car. Catherine shifted uncomfortably. Thomas continued. "You will live at my estate. You will supervise Sophia. You will keep her safe. And in return, you will be paid $5,000 per week." Catherine choked. "5,000? Tax-free." "That's insane." "No." Thomas leaned back. "That's fair." She shook her head. "You can't just buy people." "I'm not buying you." "It sounds exactly like that." "I'm buying your time. And if I say no?" Thomas looked out the window. The city was far behind them now. Snow-covered trees lined the highway. "Then I stop the car," he said calmly. "You step out, and you return to your old life." Catherine's hands tightened. "Which you already destroyed." Thomas met her eyes. "I removed obstacles. You manipulated my situation. Yes, at least you're honest. I don't lie unless necessary." The SUV turned down a long private road. Tall iron gates appeared ahead. Guards stood outside them. Catherine stared. "Where are we?" "My home." The gates opened slowly. Beyond them stretched a massive estate. Stone mansion, snow-covered gardens, security cameras everywhere. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. The SUV stopped in front of the entrance. Catherine whispered one word. Wow. Thomas opened the door. Come. She stepped out slowly. Before she could say anything, a small voice shouted, Catherine! A blur of motion ran down the front steps. Sophia. The little girl launched herself into Catherine's arms. You came back. Catherine laughed softly. Hi, sweetheart. Sophia hugged her tightly. You smell like cookies. That's because I worked in a diner. Sophia giggled. Thomas watched quietly. Something softened in his expression. Daddy said you're staying with us. Sophia said happily. Catherine glanced up at Thomas. I didn't agree yet. Sophia gasped. You have to. Why? Because Daddy doesn't smile at anyone. The little girl whispered loudly. But he smiled when he talked about you. Catherine looked back at Thomas. He cleared his throat. Bruno, he said sharply. Yes, boss. Show Miss Hale to the East Wing. Bruno nodded. Sophia grabbed Catherine's hand. Come see my room. Catherine hesitated. She looked back at Thomas. Am I a guest or a prisoner? Thomas considered the question, then he answered honestly. That depends on what choices you make. Catherine followed Sophia into the mansion, but as the heavy doors closed behind her, one thought echoed in her mind. She had stepped out of poverty, but she might have stepped into something far more dangerous, because powerful men didn't invite people into their lives without a reason. And Catherine had a feeling she hadn't discovered Thomas Rossi's real reason yet. Life inside Thomas Rossi's estate felt unreal, not because it was luxurious, because it was controlled. Every door had security sensors, every hallway had cameras, every staff member moved quietly, respectfully, carefully, like people who understood the consequences of making mistakes. Catherine noticed it within the first week. This wasn't simply a rich man's house. It was a command center, but Sophia made it easier to forget. The little girl followed Catherine everywhere. They spent mornings reading, afternoons drawing horses, evenings baking cookies in the enormous kitchen, while the staff pretended not to notice flour covering the marble counters. Sophia laughed often. A clear, bright sound that seemed strangely rare inside the mansion. And Catherine realized something unsettling. Sophia wasn't used to laughter. Not here. Thomas was rarely home during the day, but sometimes Catherine saw him late at night, standing alone in the library, looking at documents, or maps, or security screens, a man constantly preparing for war. 2 weeks passed before their worlds collided again. It happened on a Friday evening. Catherine was in the kitchen helping Sophia decorate sugar cookies when Thomas walked in. The room changed instantly. The chefs straightened. The guards near the door stiffened. Even the air seemed to tighten. Thomas wore a black tuxedo. His jacket hung open, his bow tie undone around his collar. He looked exhausted, but still terrifyingly composed. Sophia, he said calmly. The girl looked up. Yes, Papa. Bedtime. But we're baking. His eyes softened slightly. Tomorrow. Sophia pouted but obeyed. She hugged Catherine before running upstairs. Don't eat my cookies! I promise, Catherine called after her. The kitchen fell silent. Only Catherine and Thomas remained. Thomas walked to the counter. He picked up a cookie, studied it. You have flour on your face, he said. Catherine wiped her cheek. You're welcome to help, you know. I don't bake. That's tragic. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You're very comfortable insulting me. You're very comfortable invading my life. A faint smirk touched his lips. Then it disappeared. We have a situation. Catherine crossed her arms. What kind of situation? The Moretti family. Even Catherine had heard that name. The Morettis were the Rossi family's biggest rival, a brutal crime syndicate controlling the south side of the city. What about them? She asked. Salvatore Moretti believes I'm distracted. Thomas leaned against the counter. He thinks focusing on Sophia has made me weak. And tonight I prove him wrong. Catherine's stomach tightened. What does that have to do with me? We're going to dinner. She blinked. We? Yes. I'm not going to a Mafia dinner. It's a public restaurant. That doesn't make it better. Thomas's voice hardened slightly. I need Sophia present. Catherine stared. You're bringing a 6-year-old into a mob negotiation? I'm bringing my daughter to dinner. And hoping nobody shoots. Thomas stepped closer. His voice lowered. Hope is not part of my strategy. Catherine held his gaze. And if something goes wrong? Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her. You will stay close to her. That's not reassuring. Before she could protest further, a housekeeper appeared holding a garment bag. Your dress, Miss Hale. Catherine frowned. My what? Thomas gestured upstairs. 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, Catherine stood in front of a mirror and barely recognized herself. The dress was deep emerald green silk. Backless, elegant, the kind of dress worn by people who belonged in luxury restaurants, not former diner waitresses. She walked downstairs carefully in unfamiliar heels. Thomas stood in the foyer waiting. When he looked up, he stopped. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes lingered. You clean up well, Catherine said. You are acceptable, he replied. But the tension in his jaw told another story. Sophia ran down the stairs between them. I look like a princess. She wore a small silver dress with a matching coat. You look dangerous, Catherine said. Sophia giggled. The convoy left 10 minutes later. Their destination, Vittorio's restaurant. Neutral territory. Or at least that's what Thomas called it. The restaurant was elegant. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, soft piano music. But Catherine noticed something else. Men with sharp eyes, hidden bulges under jackets, security pretending to be customers. Thomas sat at the head of the table, Sophia beside him, Catherine beside Sophia. Eat, Thomas murmured quietly. You look nervous. I am nervous, Catherine whispered back. There are guns everywhere. There are always guns. That didn't help. Dinner arrived. Conversation stayed polite, but tension hovered like a storm cloud. Then the restaurant door opened, and the room changed. An older man with silver hair entered, Salvatore Moretti. 4 men followed him. The entire restaurant went silent. Moretti smiled, but the smile looked like a shark's. Thomas Rossi, he said loudly. Dinner with the little princess. Thomas didn't stand. Salvatore. Moretti approached the table. He looked at Catherine. New girlfriend? Thomas's hand tightened around his wine glass. Moretti chuckled. Prettier than the last one. The wine glass shattered in Thomas's grip. Apologize, Thomas said quietly. Or what? Moretti reached into his jacket. The room froze. But Catherine wasn't looking at Moretti. She was looking at the window behind him. In the reflection, she saw something else. A waiter, standing behind Thomas, pulling something from beneath his serving tray. Not a pitcher, a gun. Everything slowed. Thomas hadn't seen it. He was focused on Moretti. Catherine moved before thinking. Thomas! She shoved Sophia down and threw herself over the child. 2 muffled shots exploded. Glass shattered. Wine sprayed across the table. The room erupted into chaos. Thomas reacted instantly. The table flipped. His pistol appeared in his hand. 2 shots. The assassin waiter collapsed. Guests screamed. Moretti's guards pulled weapons. Thomas fired again. Bruno! His giant bodyguard grabbed Sophia. Move! Catherine stayed low, pulling Sophia toward the kitchen. Bullets tore through the dining room. A thug blocked the kitchen door. Gun raised. Catherine froze. Then, bang! The man dropped. Thomas stood behind him, gun smoking. Go! He shouted. They ran, out the back door, into the alley. The SUV screeched forward. They dove inside. The car sped away. Silence filled the vehicle except for Sophia's quiet sobs. Catherine held her tightly. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're safe." Thomas sat across from them. Blood trickled down his temple, but his eyes were locked on Catherine. "You saw the reflection," he said quietly. "Yes." "You protected her." "Yes." "Why?" Catherine looked at him. The same answer as before. "She's a child." Thomas studied her for a long time. Then he said something quietly. Something that changed everything. "You're not leaving this house again." Catherine frowned. That wasn't the deal. Thomas's voice hardened. "It is now. Because after tonight," he realized something terrifying. His daughter wasn't the only one he couldn't afford to lose anymore. The ride back to the Rossi estate was silent. Snow streaked past the windows like ghostly lines in the darkness. The convoy moved fast, tires cutting through frozen roads while armed security vehicles surrounded them on every side. Inside the SUV, Sophia had finally stopped crying. Her small hands still clutched Catherine's sweater. "Are the bad men gone?" the little girl whispered. Catherine brushed Sophia's hair gently. "Yes, sweetheart." Her voice was calm, even though her heart was still racing. Thomas sat across from them, staring at Catherine with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. His temple was bleeding slightly where shattered glass had struck him during the shooting. But he seemed completely unaware of it. "You saved her life," he said quietly. Catherine sighed. "I noticed." Thomas almost smiled, but the expression disappeared quickly. "You saw something I didn't. I saw a reflection. You reacted faster than my security team. That's because your security team wasn't looking for the right problem." Thomas leaned forward slightly. "And what problem was that?" Catherine met his gaze. The waiter wasn't nervous. Thomas blinked. "What?" "I worked in restaurants for years," she explained. "When someone is about to do something violent, their body tells the truth." She gestured with her hand. He was too calm. Thomas stared at her, processing. "You noticed behavioral patterns," he said slowly. Catherine shrugged. "Waitresses notice everything." Thomas leaned back again. For the first time since the attack, a thoughtful expression crossed his face. "You're observant. That's what happens when you survive on tips." The SUV slowed as the estate gates appeared ahead. The heavy iron barriers opened. Security guards stood everywhere. The convoy rolled into the courtyard. Thomas stepped out immediately. "Take Sophia to the safe room," he ordered. The nanny nodded quickly. Catherine stood beside him. "What happens now?" Thomas looked toward the dark mansion windows. "Now I find out who told Moretti about the dinner." Catherine frowned. "You think someone inside your organization leaked it?" "I know they did." "How?" "Because only 5 people knew where we were going." His voice was calm, too calm. "And one of them tried to kill us." The mansion doors opened. They stepped inside. Security teams rushed around the house, checking corridors, scanning for threats, but Catherine noticed something strange. Thomas wasn't angry. He was focused, cold, strategic. "Who knew?" she asked. Thomas began counting on his fingers. "Myself, Bruno, my driver, my legal advisor, and my second in command, Enzo." Catherine thought for a moment. "Well, Bruno was with us, yes. The driver would have been too exposed, yes. That leaves the advisor or the second in command." Thomas stopped walking. He looked at her. "You reached the same conclusion I did." Catherine folded her arms. "Lucky guess." "No." Thomas shook his head slightly. "You're analyzing probabilities." Before she could respond, the entire mansion went dark. Emergency lights activated. Red emergency glow flooded the hallways. Security guards immediately reached for weapons. Thomas turned slowly. Backup generators should have activated immediately, but they hadn't. Then came the sound. A heavy thud somewhere down the hallway, followed by another and another. Footsteps, calm, unhurried. A figure appeared at the end of the corridor. Enzo, Thomas's second-in-command. He wore a tactical vest and carried a rifle. Two armed men stood behind him. Thomas didn't draw his weapon yet. "Enzo," he said. Enzo smiled faintly. "Boss, you shut down my power. Yes, you killed my guards. They'll recover." Thomas tilted his head. "You're betraying me." Enzo shrugged. "Business." Catherine felt her stomach twist. "Moretti offered you money," she guessed. Enzo chuckled. "Money and territory." Thomas's voice remained steady. "You were family." Enzo's smile vanished. "That's the problem." He raised the rifle slightly. "You were always the king, and I was always the soldier. You had the power, the respect, the empire." Enzo's eyes hardened. "I got tired of waiting for scraps." Thomas sighed quietly. "So you decided to become a traitor?" "I decided to become the boss." Enzo tapped a small tablet in his hand. Catherine noticed something on the screen. "A timer. What is that?" she asked. Enzo glanced at her. "The ventilation system." Thomas's eyes darkened. "The safe room," he said. Enzo nodded slowly. "Your daughter is inside." Catherine's blood ran cold. "With the oxygen cut off," Enzo continued, 3 minutes. Thomas finally drew his gun, but Enzo shook his head. "Shoot me and the timer continues." "Call Sophia," Enzo said. "Tell her to open the door." "No," Thomas said immediately. Enzo looked at Catherine. "She trusts you." Catherine felt the weight of the moment instantly. The entire hallway seemed to shrink. Sophia, alone, locked in a room, slowly losing oxygen. Thomas turned to Catherine. His voice was low. "Don't." Enzo smiled. Tick, tock. Catherine took a breath. Her mind moved fast, very fast. "Fine," she said. Both men looked at her. "I'll call her." Thomas stared at her in disbelief. "Catherine," she raised a hand slightly. "On one condition." Enzo tilted his head. "What condition?" "You let Sophia stay in the safe room, and take me instead." The hallway went silent. Thomas's eyes widened slightly. Enzo laughed. "You think you're worth something?" Catherine looked straight at him. "I'm the woman living in Thomas Rossi's house." She stepped closer. "You take his daughter, he burns the city down. But if you take me," she shrugged, "you have leverage." Enzo considered the idea. His finger hovered over the tablet. Then he smiled. "Interesting." Thomas's voice turned dangerous. "You touch her, and you die slowly." Enzo ignored him. "Fine." He nodded. "You're the hostage now." Catherine closed her eyes briefly. Then she stepped forward. Thomas grabbed her arm, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to do this." Catherine looked at him. "Yes," she said quietly. "I do. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world was simply refusing to let a child die." The warehouse smelled like rust and old blood. Catherine woke slowly, her head throbbing. A single industrial light swung above her, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Her hands were tied behind the metal chair. The room was cold, very cold. She tested the ropes. Tight. Professional. Someone knew how to secure prisoners. A voice echoed through the empty space. "So you're the famous girl." Catherine lifted her head. Salvatore Moretti stepped out of the darkness. His silver hair was slicked back. His expensive coat hung open, but his smile was cruel, predatory. "You're smaller than I expected," he said. Catherine swallowed the copper taste in her mouth. Sorry to disappoint. Moretti chuckled. I expected Thomas Rossi to come charging through the door the moment you were taken. He glanced at his watch. But he hasn't. Catherine said nothing. Moretti leaned closer. You're not important to him. She looked straight into his eyes. You keep telling yourself that. His smile faded slightly. Behind him, Enzo stood smoking a cigarette. The traitor looked bored, like the entire situation was simply business. Moretti walked slowly around Catherine's chair. You know why you're really here? No, she said, but I'm guessing you're about to explain it anyway. Moretti laughed again. You're bait. He leaned close to her ear. Thomas Rossi doesn't have weaknesses. But now, he does. Catherine rolled her eyes. You're really dramatic for a criminal. Enzo smirked slightly from the shadows. Moretti straightened. You saved his daughter. You live in his house. You risked your life tonight. He pulled a revolver from his coat. And that means he will come. Maybe. Moretti cocked the hammer. And when he does, I'll be waiting. Catherine leaned back calmly. You made one mistake. Moretti frowned. What mistake? You assumed I was helpless. Enzo suddenly stepped forward. Boss. What? Enzo gestured toward the ceiling. Did you hear that? They all paused. Silence. Then, crash. The skylight above them exploded. Glass rained down like icy daggers. A black rope dropped through the opening, and someone descended from it like a falling shadow. Thomas Rossi landed between Catherine and the two men. He wore black tactical armor, combat boots, a rifle slung across his chest. His eyes were cold enough to freeze the entire city. Behind him, red laser dots appeared across the warehouse walls. A dozen armed men surrounded the building. Moretti's face drained of color. You brought an army! Thomas's voice was quiet. I brought witnesses. Moretti raised his revolver. Thomas fired first. One shot. The revolver flew from Moretti's hand. Two of his fingers disappeared with it. Moretti screamed. Enzo reached for his rifle, but three laser sights instantly centered on his chest. He froze. Thomas walked forward slowly. Each step echoed across the warehouse. He stopped beside Catherine and cut her ropes. His hands were steady. But when he saw the bruise on her cheek, something dark moved behind his eyes. You're late, Catherine whispered. Thomas almost smiled. I told you. His voice softened slightly. I always come back. Catherine rubbed her wrists. You did bring a lot of friends. Thomas turned toward Moretti. I wasn't planning to fight. He gestured around the warehouse. I was planning to end things. Moretti dropped to his knees. You can't kill me here. Why not? There are witnesses. Thomas nodded slowly. Yes. That's the point. He turned toward Enzo. The traitor looked pale now. You betrayed family, Thomas said. Enzo tried to speak. Thomas, listen. A single gunshot echoed. Enzo collapsed instantly. Thomas didn't even blink. He turned back to Moretti. You threatened my daughter. I'll give you territory. You tried to murder a child. I'll give you half the city. Thomas stepped closer. You kidnapped the woman I love. The warehouse went silent. Catherine blinked. Moretti looked stunned. You! What? Thomas didn't repeat it. He simply raised his gun. Moretti's voice cracked. Wait! The shot echoed. Then silence returned. The war was over. Thomas lowered the weapon slowly. He turned back to Catherine. For the first time that night, his expression softened. Are you hurt? Just my pride. You shouldn't have traded yourself for Sophia. Catherine shrugged. She needed someone. Thomas studied her. You always do this. Do what? Choose the right thing. She smiled faintly. Someone has to. The morning sun began creeping through the broken skylight. Snowflakes drifted through the air. Thomas held out his hand. Come home! 1 year later, Chicago winter returned. Snow covered the streets again. But inside the Rossi estate, the world felt different. Warm. Peaceful. Sophia ran across the living room holding a drawing. Catherine! Yes? It's a horse. She held up the crayon masterpiece proudly. Catherine laughed. It's beautiful. Thomas entered the room quietly. Sophia ran past him toward the kitchen. Cookies! Thomas shook his head. Then he walked toward Catherine. The old camel-colored coat still hung near the front door. He lifted it gently. You should wear this today. Catherine smiled. It's old. It saved my daughter. He draped it over her shoulders, and it saved me. She looked at him softly. You were already saving yourself. Thomas took her hand. Maybe. They stepped outside together. Snow fell quietly around them. Sophia ran ahead laughing, and for the first time in many years, Thomas Rossi wasn't thinking about enemies, or power, or war. He was thinking about something far more dangerous: peace, reflection. Power often believes it owns the world, but sometimes the most powerful force is something much quieter: a choice. A simple moment where someone decides to do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. Catherine didn't save Sophia because of money, or fear, or reward. She did it because silence would have been wrong. And in the end, that single act of courage changed the fate of an entire empire. Because the truth about power is simple: the strongest people aren't the ones who rule. They're the ones who refuse to stop being kind. And before you go, tell me in the comments, if you were in Catherine's place, would you have walked away, or would you have stayed and faced the storm? Thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next story.